Hello everyone, I'm Ali and I'm your host for this lab. We want to create home lab for vSAN ESA. All of us know about that. In vSAN ESA, you should have full NVMe environment to create vSAN cluster. But usually we don't have NVMe in our laboratory, but maybe we want to know the features and work with a new type of vSAN that VMware mentioned in version 8 as a VMware ESA vSAN. So I want to demonstrate how we can create a vSAN ESA from scratch in environment that there isn't any NVMe in that. In my lab, you can see it is a normal workstation that have one of the Supermicro motherboard and also E5 CPU that is in compatible version for version 8 as a minimum requirement. You know that to create vSAN ESA you should have vCenter and ES6i at least version 8, but in this case I'm using the latest version that released in October 2023. Also I have some storage disks. These are not so fast resources. I can say that it is SATA 7.2, but good capacity, about 3 terabyte capacity on each data store. Now we want to know that how can we create the lab. First of all, we should create our nested ES6i. For this lab, we need at least 3 hosts as a minimum for a vSAN ESA cluster. And I create one or first ES6i to show you how you can create and what type of configuration you should use during your selection, and then second one and third one configuration are same as first one. So we try to create the machine. I put ES6-vSAN as a name, choose the data store, choose our physical ES6i, choose a data store, for example in fourth part. Next, guest OS family should be other, and we should choose ES6i version 8. Next. Now, what is the requirement to create the lab as a minimum? To find our answer, I go to Google and search vSAN ESA minimum requirement. First link is VMware link. I click on it. You can see in this one it mentioned vSAN ESA configuration. For CPU we need at least 20 core, for memory 32 GB, and boot device should be 64 GB. Because we want to configure nested, this configuration will be done on our virtual machine. So I choose vCPU 20, 32 GB for memory, then go to choose boot size. For boot, I use NVMe, and also for vSAN disk device also we should use NVMe. But for boot, you can choose a SCSI controller or any other type of resource, but because I want to configure all of the parts same as together, so I use NVMe controller for boot and also for device. So I should choose NVMe controller. I again should mention that it's not mandatory, the configuration, that using the controller for boot. 64 10, we choose controller NVMe. Then we can remove this one because we don't need SCSI for vSAN ESA. Add new device. I use another controller for vSAN resources. Then I should create hard disks. How many hard disks we need? Minimum we need 4 hard disks for vSAN ESA based on VMware documentation that I mentioned before. Team provision, it is the first resource for vSAN. We choose controller 2, then again go and add second hard disk as a resource. Same configuration should be done. Team provision, controller 2, and add third disk. Team provision, controller 2, and final disk. .6 terabyte as a minimum that VMware mentioned in their document. Team provision, new controller 2, we don't need SCSI, and remove this because I want to use, based on the best practice, separate my management network from vSAN VM kernel. So I try to add another NIC. This is my secondary NIC, and I will connect it to port group on my host that is trunk, because I want to use a specific VLAN for my vSAN traffic. And then because I should install ES6i, so I upload a file to my data store ISO. ES6i version 8 update to this one, connect at power on. Everything is okay now. Next, and this configuration is ready. Then we should install ESXi version 8. We use 8 update 2 on virtual machine. Okay, so we have 3 ESXi in that case with same configuration, and also ESXi version 8 installed on them. I try to power on them. And wait to booting procedure become complete and then come back to you. The configuration on ESXi, it is very simple. Only show you what configuration I use, because then we should use it in vCenter. Set the password, configure management network. I use first adapter, and the IP address I use for my lab is static, and the IP address is 192.168.831, 832 and 833 for my management network for our 3 vSAN server. Then we should go to vCenter server and try to create VM kernel network for our vSAN cluster. You can use a normal switch, a standard switch, but I try to use based on the best practice distributed switch. Create a new distributed switch, and I put the name vSAN DSW. I use one uplink for only vSAN VM kernel traffic, and I don't want to create default port group. Then I create port group for my VM kernel and put the name vSAN port group. And in my lab, I use VLAN 13 for vSAN traffic. This is ready because this is nested virtualization environment, so I try to change default security, promiscuous mode, MAC address change, and also fork transmit, all change default from deny to accept. Okay, this is ready, and now I can go and configure my host to distributed switch. So I should add them to data center. then second node, same procedure, and final node. Okay, now we have 3 hosts added in vCenter, and we want to use this host for vSAN cluster. Now we try to create new cluster for vSAN, vSAN dash cluster, and enable vSAN service and also enable vSAN ESA. Now before add host to cluster, I try to configure my VM kernel traffic. I created this one, so I should go to on each host and create VM kernel for that. But I should connect host to switch. So try to add host to switch. And vmnic 1 to uplink 1. Okay. Now come back to create VM kernel. Choose the switch and port group, and this part is very important. We should choose vSAN traffic, use static, and override default gateway for our vSAN network. And then go to second one, again same configuration, and finally third one. Okay. Now we can see that the requirement to configure VM kernel network on each host completed, and we are ready to configure vSAN cluster, this one. We can go from quick start. Second step you can see is add host, and third step is configure cluster. First one is enable vSAN ESA services. We try to add our host because previously we added to vCenter. We choose it, 3 server. Next. We don't need to import image. This part we should wait to configuration become complete. So I pause the video. Now we can see all recent tasks completed, and the view is now changed. On vSAN cluster, on configure part, quick start, we can see that the second part is completed now. This type of warning is because we use nested virtualization for our lab, and in your physical environment you don't receive this type of error if you use compatible host. Now we go to the last part. We should configure cluster. We go to configure vSAN HCI is type of the vSAN we want to use because it's include the storage and compute resource together. In this part you can see that it asked us to configure distributed switch. This view is in situation that you didn't configure vSAN VM kernel, because before cluster want to be complete you should configure VM kernel traffic, but because we did it before this step, so we can choose this part instead of configure the switch and connect them to that. I choose configure networking setting later because I already configure it. Now our vSAN is single site vSAN. We can choose the services. We don't need for this part. We can see to host option, lockdown mode or NTP server or AVC you can enable for that. Next. We want to claim disks for our servers. You can see that there is some available disk, but it mentioned that it is not compatible because again we are in nested environment. On every server we have 4 disks. You can see 4 disks is available. So I can choose claim all of the disks. You know that in vSAN ESA we don't have disk group, and also we don't have a separate disk for cache. All disks use cache and data together. Next. And finish. Again, you can see on recent task another tasks in background try to be complete, but this time it is faster than previous part. The only thing that remain is using the license for your cluster. For cluster, you need to activate the license for vSAN cluster, and you should assign license. Add the license to the cluster so we can see now we have a license, but we should wait to finish all remaining tasks. You can see some tasks still not completed, but most of the tasks completed. So again, I pause the video and then come back to you when the last task completed. The last part is health check, but because we are not connected to internet, I hope we will receive the error on health check. But it's not important. This error online check is because we received this error because we don't have connectivity to internet. Because of that, you can see this error, and this is not important. Now I think it will be ready soon, and we are in last part of it because all of the tasks completed except one. Okay, now it seems all recent tasks completed. Yeah, we come back to vCenter to check the status. vSAN service is enabled and in healthy status, and also we can see that what type of configuration we choose. This service is not available because we don't configure it. In this management, we can see all 4 disks on each server connected to vSAN, and it seems the data store is now ready. So if we go to data store, we can see vSAN data store. Yes, it is completed. Our task is completed. I hope you enjoy this video.